Live.
Thanks, Brandon. We'll get started. First question. Here's.
Guys, I know we have to talk about just the season as a whole, kind of broken into two halves, but as you kind of reflect on what this year has looked like for you guys, how would you both just assess it?
We have talked about this a lot. I think it's incumbent upon us at the end of each season to look back, and it's the most helpful for us in terms of informing future decisions. And when we look back at the regular season, obviously there's a lot to be proud of. Overcame a lot of adversity. It was fun watching those guys go out and compete on a daily basis and see what they did. And then obviously with our ultimate goal, came up incredibly short. And it was painful, and we begun the process of, of doing everything we can to wrap our arms around it, understand it as best we can, react to the things that are important to react to, not react to the things that aren't, and do everything we can to put ourselves back in the position we were in a week and a half ago and have the October process play out way differently.
A year ago, you called it an organizational failure. What is it this time?
I think those words ring true. I mean, we talk about this a lot, and I would hope that our actions demonstrate this. Our goal each and every year is to win a championship. In our opinion, putting ourselves in the best position to do that in the regular season is to win the division, which then puts us in the best position to win a championship. And when we don't do that, I think it's fair to say it's an organizational failure. It doesn't mean that there weren't successes and a lot of things to grab onto and a lot of special memories that were created throughout this summer that I think are real and happened and are meaningful. That being said, our goal was to win 11 games in October, and we didn't win one. So we need to figure out what we can do differently and how to go about it. And we're at that fork in the road. We get to choose. Do we just lay down, or do we keep fighting? And, this weekend I didn't feel like the keep fighting was the right answer. But we've certainly gotten there, and we've got meetings starting tomorrow to really get into things and try to put ourselves in the best position so that on October 17th next year, this situation is very different. We're talking about preparing for Game 2 of the NLCS.
Obviously, you guys won in 2020, and they're different teams in the 3 years since then, but when you look at some of these things that have popped up these last couple Octobers, does it feel like either the way the roster is built, do you guys prepare for the postseason, there's some sort of postseason problem about how you guys are going about it that time of year that's leading to some of these early exits?
I don't know the answer. For our offense to be an issue this year was really surprising to us. We scored over 900 runs in the first time in Los Angeles Dodger history. It's the best offensive team we've had in this run. So that was surprising to us. Obviously, there are 3-game snippets throughout a year where our offense doesn't perform. How much of it is that? How much of it is other things? I don't know the answer. And a lot of these things, it's hard to know the answer to. There is an element that is October theater and just what plays out on a daily and nightly basis. And there's other things that we can do a better job of, and how to separate those. It's incumbent upon us to figure out.
Andrew, this is the second year of the playoff format where the 2 top seeds have 5 days off. Is that what you're talking about? Because there seems to be more talk about 3 100-win teams that had that 5-day layoff that are at home right now.
I mean, for us, I certainly would not use that as an excuse. And our goal next year is to win the division and have those 5 days off again. So, it's 2 years into this format. We don't concern ourselves too much with what's optimal, what's ideal. It doesn't really matter. It is what it is. And for us, it's about how to operate the best we can within it. We tried to simulate a lot of at-bats, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because there's no question that 5 days off affects hitters' timing. There's no question. Now, if getting enough at-bats leading up to that keeps that timing in place, obviously we didn't do a good enough job. So our goal is to win the division next year. And once we do that and hopefully put ourselves in position to get those 5 days off, we need to really think long and hard about the best way to set up those 5 days and do everything we can to get our guys ready to play in game one.
Yeah, Andrew, could you have done more to strengthen the starting pitching dating back to last offseason?
Yeah, sure. I think anytime you have the benefit of hindsight and how things play out, I think there were a number of things that played out this year that were unforeseen by us. We talk a lot about the need for pitching depth and how it comes up even more than what you anticipate. This year was even an accelerated version of that. And so there were a lot of things that were unforeseen, and whether we should have foreseen them or not is a fair question. I think we also had a number of really talented young pitchers who we wanted to make sure and create some kind of opportunity for, and we did. And I think they helped us in 2023. And they're going to help us a lot in 2024 and beyond. And I think it's the challenge of sustaining success over a long period of time. We've talked about this a lot. The only way to do it is to incorporate young players onto your roster as you are going and winning. And usually when you do that, there's some lumps, but hopefully the team talent around it is enough to withstand that. Not all really talented prospects go from AAA to the major leagues and hit the ground running and are great from day one. It's not always a straight line. And so we need to be able to provide that environment to be able to bring them in, just like we've done with a lot of talented other young players looking back, and keep doing that with our goal to continue to sustain success to put us in a position for each and every year to win a championship.
Does the organization place enough importance in the 6 or 7 inning starting pitcher?
Yeah, I think the question is how many of them are there on planet Earth? I think it's the first question. Now you can get to a more global question of player development in the industry, and you can go back, and this probably isn't the right setting for it, but to youth baseball and what people are training for, and velocity readings instead of how to take down more innings. It's a much larger question and philosophical discussion. But we too would like guys to go 7 innings, pitch really well, and be able to go to the 2 best guys in the bullpen. That's a much more comfortable recipe. The question is how many of them are there, and then why?
So do you think then that before these guys even get to you, so right, you are drafting kids out of high school stuff. Are they coming to you at a much different place than they were, say, 10 years ago when,
I just think training is different than what it was. I think preparation going in, again, this is a topic for another time, not to. Right now we're talking about the 2023 Dodgers and any 2024 related. It's a much larger global question that, pitcher injury, pitcher development, I think is a very important question for the entire industry. I care less about it for the other 29 teams and care about it for us, and it's something that's very front of mind for us.
I know going into the playoffs, obviously you had to kind of believe in your roster and stuff, but in your heart of hearts, when did you kind of start suspecting that the starting pitching could be a problem for
Again,
you?
I think our bigger issue is the offense because it was unexpected. If you would have said your pitching staff would have given up 4 runs in games 2 and 3, I would have bet a lot of money that we would have won at least one of those 2 games with our offense. And so it was a combination. Obviously, our starting pitching didn't pitch as well as they could have. So it's not like that was what we should have expected. Our offense didn't perform as well as it could have. It's not what we would have expected. Obviously, our bullpen was great. But when you're not clicking in 2/3 of those facets, it's hard to win a baseball game. And unfortunately, we saw it front and center.
I mean, I get the.
We're talking about getting guys ready to go and 2 first-round bases in as many years. Are there staff changes, anything that's been discussed at this point?
No. The collective effort of this group and the culture, and not just the, hey, everyone gets along, going through the clubhouse before a game and just watching how everyone is focused, all of our players, on how to try to win a game. So the one thing I can say with absolute certainty and there aren't a lot of things I can do that about as we post-mortem, is it was certainly not from a lack of effort. Watching the way these guys prepared, cared, did everything they could to put themselves in the best position to go out and have success. Now, we didn't do it, and that is ultimately what matters most, and so it's figuring out from that. But I think Doc, our coaching staff, did an incredible job this year, and none of us did a good job for those 3 games against Arizona.
On the starting pitching point, after a year like this, do you need to put more of an emphasis on having more established guys that can go 6 or 7 in a postseason environment in case some of the other unforeseen things you talked about?
There aren't many guys going 6 or 7 in postseason games, anecdotally, as I look around. So, yes, we want our pitching to allow as few runs as possible and our offense to score as many as possible. How we do it will fall out of where our overall team roster is at that point. But yes, from an ideal standpoint, I would love a starting pitcher to go 7 innings, take our 2 best relievers, go 8-9, have a good offense in place, and yeah, that's great.
Did you buy the philosophy that you can build teams to have more success in October, even if it leads to potentially more variance, less kind of future financial flexibility when you're looking at a regular season?
Well, I don't think I understood the backside of the question.
Like if you have to go and, probably pay more or take bigger risks on guys who, maybe have more of a postseason track record or like traditional postseason pieces, do you believe in like the philosophy that teams can be built with October more in mind versus like,
I
regular?
think people should really go through and look at each guy year to year. The noise and variance year to year, we've had guys who've been incredible one year, not good the next. Mediocre one year. Like, it's not just like, oh, he's a postseason player. He is not. It's just not that simple. And we've seen it firsthand. I mean, look at Corey Seager's 2019, 2020, 2021. I mean, there are so many examples of guys that it's just not that easy to be like, oh, let's just get the guy who's going to perform in October. Because if it was, I promise you we would do that.
You mentioned unforeseen circumstances this year, but an aspect of each of the last 3 postseasons is like you guys running out of starting pitching in October, for various reasons. Do you think what can you do to build in for those unforeseen circumstances? Do you have to just, what can you do to sort of, every year there's going to be unforeseen circumstances. You can't just say like, oh man, what are we going to do? Like, how do you sort of prepare ahead of time for that?
Well, I mean, again, I think a lot of times when people have unforeseen things pop up, especially like essentially an entire starting rotation replaced, I think those teams often don't make the playoffs. I think those unforeseen things happen, and it's like, okay, this was a down year. And it's where the strength of our scouting department, our player development department, has put us in this position where we have these arms coming that, I feel very strongly that Bobby Miller was ready for October. Obviously, he didn't pitch great in Game 2, but I will bet that had he pitched again, I would have bet on him. Just like we watched Walker Buehler in Atlanta, his first start, and then what he did subsequently thereafter. So, again, it's hard to draw definite, firm conclusions from 3 games. Now, things that we can do better, we need to figure out and we need to do. But, from my standpoint, I would bet on Bobby Miller starting an October game, and hopefully we get that chance next October to see it.
Put another way on the depth issue, going back to the regular season, Tony Gonsolin, pitched for a few months, knowing his UCL was torn. Obviously I guess the reports couldn't injure himself further, so he felt compelled to pitch because you guys needed arms. Do you think it's fair to have a pitcher put in that position to feel like he needs to, he got his head kicked in for 2 months, right?
Well, I think
that's fair.
I think it was more of a mutual because he had a contract that was set up where he was rewarded financially for it, knowing he was going to miss the next year. So it was more of a mutual benefit.
Going back to what you said about Bobby Miller earlier, say you guys had hit against the D-backs and had gone through to the next round. With the starting pitching the way it was, right, with whatever was going on with Kershaw and, landslide home runs happened in the regular season too, do you think you had enough pitching again, if you guys had hit, not, within reason, right? Not scoring 30 runs a game, whatever, but do you think you had enough pitching to get through the 2 more rounds?
Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to really think much about the CS because at the point after game 2 is all about how do we put ourselves in the best position to win the next 3 games. But yeah, I think from a 13-man pitching staff, I do think that there was enough arm talent there. Again, I don't think if we played that game 1 and you got to replay that 100 times, I don't think that happens more than 2 or 3 times. Now, it happened in the one that actually happened, and that's what matters most. But I do not think that that was just fait accompli, that is what was going to happen in that 1 inning. It did. So we have to live with that, but it doesn't materially affect things in terms of how we assess someone's talent level and what they're capable of doing. And even when we assess someone's talent level of being able to do this, we understand that it can be better. It also could be worse. And that's the theater of October that is incredible for fans. And when I'm not emotionally vested in it, it is incredible to watch. But there is a wide range of things that can and do happen, and it doesn't change our assessment of a player's talent level.
Going back to kind of Jack's question about the regular season versus playoffs, right? It's probably like an oversimplification, but I think kind of what he's getting at is, right, the 6th, 7th inning guy, right? Like you said, they're very rare. They cost a lot of money, right? You might be able to get like 3 starting pitchers right now. Each of those 3 guys might be able to be like the Rockies in June. Right, you might not necessarily want to throw those guys out on the thing in October, and so I guess, do you feel like you can maybe get that right? Would getting that guy and investing a lot in like 1 guy as opposed to depth? Do you think you could do both, where like to keep winning in the regular season, like the way you guys have, and maybe set yourself up better for October, or would setting yourself up
again?
Better
Look at our 2020 rotation, and like it can come in all different ways. The funny thing to me at the end of each October is there is a narrative that is formed after that team wins, whoever it is. 2015, it was the power bullpen. 2016, it was youth. Each year, there's a different narrative that comes. And with the exception of 1 team, there have been no repeat winners for a long period of time, which speaks to the difficulties of it. But more than that, how there's not just one way to do it. And so for us, I think it's not about having this is the one formula that works. It is going to fall out of the talent that we have. Some years we may be heavier on the offensive side and bullpen. Some years starting pitching may be our strength. Because if you ask me, yeah, I'd like to have a really strong rotation, a really strong bullpen, and a great lineup. Sometimes things in that aren't great when you're putting together a team and you're trying to make the best team that you can. Sometimes there's weaker spots in that, and so that kind of falls out of what is available and accessible, but it's hard to go beyond that because we've had years where we've had really strong starting rotations going into October and haven't won, and then it was, well, do you think you need to have a better offense, or your bullpen needs to be better? It's a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole, and something else pops up. Again, what's important is taking what we can learn from it and doing everything we can to put ourselves in a better position. And so to the extent that adding starting pitching that can go 6 to 7 innings is available and lines up and we can access, that's great. And it definitely, at least from a quality of life standpoint, is a better quality of life. Like, I prefer that personally. For a starting pitcher to take the ball and do that, there's just fewer and fewer of them every year. So therefore, the supply is more limited. It's just harder to access. It doesn't mean that we're not going to try, and it doesn't mean we're not going to try to have the most well-rounded team that we possibly can, because that is our mindset.
In offensive narratives, if I may, people will see what happens in October and try to make sense of the results in a way that makes sense to them. I think for a lot of fans right now, they've seen 100 games in 2 consecutive seasons, haven't gotten out of that first postseason round. What kind of story do you tell yourself that makes that make sense?
Well, I mean, no matter what happens, any year that we don't win the World Series, is painful and it's going to take a while to get over. So it's going back and just looking at, like we've discussed already, like what are some of the things that we can go ahead and look to improve upon to put ourselves in a better position to perform optimally as soon as the postseason starts. We haven't done that the last 2 years. We came into this year like really fired up about the clubhouse and the team that we put together and the chemistry, and couldn't have felt more confident about that part of our team, of how tightly knit they were. They had been through adversity, and then it's hard to, and a gritty team, it's hard to show that when you're playing from behind. I know everybody was well into every pitch and trying as best they could. It was hard to show that with the way those games played out. So a lot of it is just looking at what the team did in the regular season, how it played out in the postseason, and okay, that unfortunately wasn't, didn't play out in our favor. Let's go back and look at different aspects of what can be improved and how much of it is noise, and making sure that we don't overreact to some aspects of it too. Because look, we're all disappointed and it hurts the fact that we didn't win. But to do an overcorrection is also not helpful in that way.
What is your priority this season? More starting pitcher or more pitchers or more offense? Who I'm talking about.
I mean, we'll certainly be focused on starting pitching for sure, and it's how to balance the young guys and where we're at there, obviously with Walker Buehler coming back, and then the market, whether it's through trade or free agency. Bullpen, we feel like we're in a pretty good place. It doesn't mean we can't supplement here or there. And then offense, we feel good about, but there's some position player needs that we're going to have to address and figure out what makes the most sense within our current group.
Andrew, you look at Mookie's performance in the last two postseasons. Obviously, at 2020, first 2.5 rounds in 2021, he was great. How do you assess that? How do you make sense?
I think going into any postseason, Mookie and Freddie would be among the highest drafted if you got to just draft going into October who you have. Obviously, Mookie did not perform this DS or last DS. Last DS, he actually hit some balls hard that were caught. This one, a lot of our guys were just kind of stuck in between. Again, I know it's not from a lack of effort or caring. And so then it's about doing everything we can. If we're fortunate enough, to win the division and have those 5 days off, what's the right balance for everybody? And each guy's probably a little bit different in terms of what we do to put them in the best position. I don't know the answer to it, but I know it's not, from a lack of effort or caring. And so, going into what I hope is a postseason run in 2024, I would bet on Mookie performing really well because he's that talented of a player, and he's also had success in October.
A year ago, also, there was a topic of the Padres pitcher, especially Blake Snell, for example, comes to mind. Pitching you guys very differently than he had before. And here with the Diamondbacks, they seem to the starting pitcher at least to change it a little bit on you guys. Is there something to in-game adjustments and now being able to sort of, change your game plan a little bit when you see guys attacking you a different way?
Yeah, I don't think Gallen did. I think it was a very similar approach. Yeah, I think from our standpoint, when I go back and look at that series, I think the number of mistakes that each pitching staff made wasn't that different. I think they converted at a freakishly high rate, and we converted at a freakishly low rate. So the question is why? And getting into that, I think in-game adjustability is always important, whether it's in June or in October. Obviously, it's even more heightened in October. But I think being able to always make in-game adjustments is incredibly important. I'm not down in the cage or in the dugout, but I would bet on our hitting guys being on top of that and noticing those trends and how things are playing out and messaging that. I would bet on that.
Andrew, it seemed like when you put together your postseason roster, pitching talent that you had on it, it seemed like the strength was the bullpen. Did you guys discuss perhaps using an opener, perhaps doing kind of a bullpen approach to the postseason as opposed to going with the traditional starter?
Yeah, we did. Obviously, our bullpen was a real strength for us. We did, and ultimately came out where we did. And always the benefit of hindsight. You would always do something differently if it doesn't play out in your favor. But our pen guys came in and pitched incredibly well, in those games, and not surprising with the talent and the depth that we had down there.
This was a second consecutive organizational failure. It does not sound like you feel significant changes need to be made to avoid a third consecutive organizational failure. Call me cynical. Go ahead. Let's get that out of the way. Is this arrogance, steadfast and convicted in the way of doing things? How come you're not talking in terms of making significant changes?
Because organizational failure means it's on all of us, and we all have a hand in it. And if this were one person or a small collection of people, in my estimation, then we would make changes. We just wouldn't do it to say, look, we made changes and try to cover up what has happened. Instead, we have a lot of extremely disappointed, angry people who are all going to work really hard together to avoid being in this position next year. And so with the talent, with how much they care, with their work ethic, how much they care about these fans and doing everything we can to win a championship in 2024, felt like making a change would be for the sake of it instead of actually bringing better, more talented people in.
Andrew, in your heart of hearts, you've always said that the postseason is a crapshoot.
I haven't said that.
Oh, you haven't?
No. I think there's an element of it. I think talent really matters. And I do think that there is good fortune that plays in. Each game, you see it all over the place. I mean, you saw Perdomo's home run that had an incredibly low home run probability, but it went out. Will Smith hit his ball a little bit better, and it happened to go for his double, where it jets out, and it's a double, and he doesn't score. Had it been a little bit more here. So there are those things that play out that add some randomness to it. I think you can just look at what the odds are going into a series. Even the best team in baseball against a team has a 60, 62. Like, the chances of winning that series are just not 90. So anytime you have it in that tight of a band, those little things that happen matter, and they add up. Now, that explains a very tightly contested series that goes the length. We didn't hold a lead in this division series. So for a team that's talented to play 27 innings where we did not hold a lead is beyond that, and it's something we have to figure out and do what we can to put ourselves in position to not have that happen.
Andrew, do you think at this point the regular season is just too different from the postseason?
No, I just think it's longer.
Just quickly looking ahead to, are you done with that? I'm sorry. Okay. I just wanted to say, looking ahead to next year and how you kind of constructed the rotation as well as just this organization this past year with the kind of dynamic of veterans and younger players, do you see that being really valuable as you prepare to construct what this team is going to look like next year, or do you see it going in a bit of a different direction?
Yeah, I think it's always a balance of those two, and we're fortunate enough to have a lot of really good talent in the upper level minor leagues. So it's always about balancing opportunity, what is available that we can go out and get, whether that's, via trade or free agency. And ultimately it's taking all of those factors in to put a team out there that's going to, give us the best chance to win a championship. And, this year we saw more of the, quote unquote youth movement, and it's kind of looking to see what our different options are, over the winter to see what that exactly looks like, but it's not exactly clear right now.
Just to ask directly, how strongly do you plan to pursue Ohtani?
Who? Obviously, we can't talk about free agents or impending free agents, but from our standpoint, which has been our mindset and the great fortune that our ownership has provided us, to be aggressive, to go out and put the best team on the field that we can. And for us, obviously, we're extremely angry, disappointed with how these last 2 off seasons have gone, and we're going to do everything we can to put ourselves in position for it not to happen next year. So what that means exactly, I'm not sure yet, but I do feel very confident that when we show up in Arizona in February, we're going to have a team that has very, very legit championship aspirations, and then it's about going out and taking care of that first part of the goal in the regular season, and then doing whatever we can to make sure we're not sitting here in this exact setting a year from now.
Just to follow up on that, are you able to sort of operate at the top of the market, just considering because long-term commitments you guys have with Mookie and Friday?
Yeah, we're in a good spot. Thank you for your concern.
Where do you stand with Kershaw?
I think he and Ellen are going to take some time right now and assess, and ball is squarely in their court, and at some point I'm sure I'll talk to him.
So if he wants to come back, I think like last year, the year before, it was kind of, if he wants to come back, we'll make it happen. Is that still kind of the organizational stance?
Absolutely.
With Buehler, you mentioned him earlier. Obviously, ideally, he comes back. He's the Walker Buehler role. That said, it is a second TJ. As you're kind of putting the team together, do you kind of like plan on him being a front of the rotation guy, or do you, how do you, I guess, how much can you count on him at this point going into next year?
I mean, we don't look at it like, okay, so now if we have a 1, now we need to get a 2. We're just looking to get as many talented players as we can. So it's not like someone has to take a place in the 1 spot, 2 spot, 3 spot, 4 spot, 5 spot. So we'd like to just acquire as many talented pitchers as we can, combine it with the pitching that we have in our organization currently. With Walker's competitiveness and seeing what he's done this year, we'll bet on him being really good next year, but it's also not something that all of our hopes and dreams for 2024 are going to be resting on his shoulders.
It does affect how you allocate the money, though, right? I mean, if you feel a little more strongly, I'm guessing if you get encouraging reports over the offseason, it might, okay, maybe we can divert a little more to the offense, or...
I mean, we want to have really strong pitching. If you look back over the years here, we've led baseball in runs allowed. Like, through the combination of our pitching and our defense, that for us is a way better quality of life than just having a slugfest where you're allowing a lot and scoring a lot. And so if you have a choice in that, we like preventing runs and then having a good enough offense to make us an elite team. And so we're going to be focused on adding quality pitching.
Yes, we already know the answer to this, but just for clarity's sake, I assume Dave Roberts is coming back next year.
Correct.
Can you say for sure what was wrong with Clayton Kershaw physically?
I cannot. You can call him.
Brandon, there was a report out there that you turned down the opportunity to interview for the Red Sox job. Is that true? And do you expect to be here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very flattered and appreciative of the interest, but I love it here. My family loves it here. Passionate about this organization and solely focused on winning multiple championships here.
Given the procedures or surgeries on the schedule for any of your players?
Does Kenny appreciate you taking the baton on this? He does.
Needs to be asked.
No. Not that we know of right now.
Time for one more, guys.
Andrew, how much responsibility do you take for this personally?
Ultimately, a lot. I think when there is an organizational failure, I think it starts and ends with me, and I didn't do a good enough job. And I'm going to do everything I can this offseason with our group to put ourselves in a position to where we are the team that plays in and wins the last game of the year next year.
Andrew? I've continued to read the transcripts of the 4 remaining teams, and a lot of times they talk about momentum. How do teams build up momentum?
I think scoring 6 runs in the first inning is really helpful. Offense, I think, creates that. I think when you get a spark of offense, I think that creates energy, and energy helps create momentum. Conversely, I think putting up 0 after 0 on the pitching side does that. I think it all comes from an after the fact, like, oh yeah, we cut the momentum after that happened. Obviously playing well, scoring a lot of runs, just brings out more energy from people.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys.